Yeah, so I'm Harrison Mooney. I'm the Vancouver Public Library's 18th writer in residence, whoa, and and the author of Invisible Boy, a memoir of self-discovery, and I've done some other stuff too. Yeah, this is the second of three panels that I planned for this residency, where I really just wanted to talk to people who had insight into the things that I was really struggling with while I was writing this book. So, I mean, the first one was transracial adoption. It was just like, what is this? What's it like for, other adoptees? And, where do we stand? Can I say, hey, adoption is bad? Is that a good idea? Or will people be mad at me? And I wanted to talk to people about that. And I was just blown away to be able to sit down with Wade Compton and Jenny Hayjun-Wills and have that discussion. The third event is this really cool ex-evangelical discussion. Just three apostates, me, me, Tara Tang, yeah, Miss Canada, Miss World Canada as well. I don't know the difference between the pageants, but she won them both, so she knows the difference. And Joshua Harris, who, yeah, I'm stunned he was available. I'm stunned that he lives here. But it turns out that, I mean, he's going to have an incredible perspective on growing up in the church. And I mean, yeah, writing the book that defined, I mean, certainly my experience as a teenager growing up and a lot of other people's as well. And then realizing that his book was harmful and wrong and unpublishing it. I mean, wow, I can't wait to talk to him. I did some research and he's mostly politely declined interviews since he left the church and went through his divorce. So, yeah, I think that he'll be working out answers on the fly. It's going to be amazing. But this one, this panel, which is actually called Black and Biracial, Coming to Terms with Terms, is where I want to talk about Black identity and like blackness, what is it? But also just about, the words that we use to describe ourselves. And I really can't think of any two people that I would want to talk about this more with than Chelene Knight, who is here visiting on Zoom. Chelene is the author of 3 books. She's currently working on a commissioned book on Black self-love and joy, forthcoming with HarperCollins Canada in 2023. And the founder of Breathing Space Creative Literary Studio, and just kind of my hero, Chelene Knight. Please clap.
Thank you, Harrison.
And to my right here, we have Ben Hagwood, a debate coach and education advocate, as well as executive director of the National Speech and Debate Association of Vancouver. Ben, welcome. Please clap for Ben. I cut your bio in half, Ben, because there's just so many big words in it. I just don't want to say them all. Do you feel like introducing yourself? Do you feel like talking? Are you terrified?
No. I would hope not. But no, I just thought that what you said was plenty. So that's
all right. Yeah, and one of the reasons that I'm excited to talk to you guys is because so the title of this event comes from my therapist, who I'm just going to scan the room and make sure isn't in here anywhere. Came to the first panel. And so, I've just been thinking a lot about, like my story, my book, and how I wanted to position myself. And one thing that I was really anxious about was like just kind of declaring myself a Black person after being raised by white people and living, in like isolation, especially from, anything resembling the Black community for most of my life, So I went through all of that. And then, I kind of like came to my senses, and then I felt just really awkward about like going into Black spaces. Like the story I tell is this one time I went into a bar in Jamaica, and the bartender, I hadn't said anything, And the bartender said, "How you doing, white boy? Have a seat." And I was like, oh, like, how did he know? It crushed me. And so I, like, writing the book, I was very anxious about, it was like, okay, well, like my white family, they're gonna throw me away. I'm not gonna hear from them again. And that's true. That's what's happened. But then I was also like, but what if the Black community doesn't accept me? Then where will I go? And, I've realized over time that a lot of this is projection, right? Like, it's not, that's actually not how that goes. Like, I'm coming out of a community that didn't accept me. And I'm like, probably it's like that in this other community. And so far what's happened is I've just been welcomed with open arms everywhere. And nobody's ever been like, you are not one of us, sir, get out, So I was really dealing with, like even getting comfortable in my early 20s and, through my 20s, dealing with getting comfortable with like saying I'm Black. And then, sometimes people would correct me. They'd say half Black, and I realize now that it was always kind of a way to diminish my power. And I know that just seems, so I see I want to know what the look on your face there was then.
Explain
Explain your face then. And where are you from?
How do I begin answering this question? So I think my reaction to what you said was, what? Like, what does it even mean to be half something?
Yeah.
I think that assumes that we are 100% of something else. And at this point, and no one is like 100% of anything. Like, we've all intermingled, and race in and of itself is just a social construct, right? Like, Blackness is kind of a position. I don't think that I would define it as like a race, but yeah, that's just weird.
Yeah.
Are you half? But
Chelene, do you have anything to add here? Has anyone ever said?
I'm writing notes because this is what I do. I've got my notebook and my pen because it's always forever fascinating to me. And I think this question of halfness or not enoughness is something I've also felt. And there's this fear or this pressure of showing up in a space and having someone question whether you should be there. So for example, if I'm writing this book on Black self-love and joy, am I the best person to write that book? I say yes, because being Black is what has shaped me. This is what I know to be true. Nobody can take that experience from me. But again, it's this idea of presenting in a particular way. And you said you went to Jamaica, you went to this bar, and they called you white boy. And I've heard this from other Black communities where it's like, and not out of a place of, ill doing or anything like that. But I've heard folks say, like, if you were to come to my town or you were to come into this village, you would be seen as white. And I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense to me at all, because that's not what has shaped me, And I think it's writer David Cheriandy that talks a lot about that. So he's someone who is half Black, half South Asian. But when he talks about how he shows up as Black, it's this idea of how he was shaped and how he grew up and what he knows to be true. And if someone says you are half that, that is taking away half of your experience. And I think that's not okay, So that's my opinion.
I've started thinking about this more recently as my wife is white and I have 2 children, and trying to figure out how to I think the way that I would navigate raising them in the States is slightly different than the way I navigate raising them here.
How? I'm pushing a buzzer. How, my friend?
So again, the radar is not as strong, which means that a lot of the things that I think we teach children, Black children in particular, how to navigate, like in certain spaces, it doesn't exist the same way here. So there doesn't feel like the immediacy of a threat, for instance, by police here. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying I'm right. But you also have to look at kind of, I guess, where
totally right.
Relation is
context.
I mean, so it's different. And there's this other side of it. And because I hear you all keep talking about like the question of like being Black or half Black or anything. I think a lot of that is tied up in the general kind of dishonorment and self-hate that exists in the context of Blackness that we have to deal with. Therapy can probably help. Just hanging out with Black people probably also helps. I think there's a multitude of ways that we can kind of fix that. But I think without addressing that self-hate part, then we don't really deal with what I think kind of parenting a child with two different parents of two different cultural backgrounds looks like, right? Because I cannot tell my child that all white people are bad because their mama white.
Mm-hmm.
It's true.
What type of decision did I just make as a parent to marry a bad person? You know, inherently. So to me, the conversation becomes difficult in that Blackness has to navigate those awkward spaces.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that
does it ever annoy you that that feels like your labor? I don't want to use the word labor in this context here, but when you the thing that you have to deal with in this partnership is also then where Blackness fits into it.
Yeah, but I think the people that are generally most comfortable with Blackness are people that understand that it generally is malleable, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it all is.
We have to you inherently generally don't fit in most of the places. At least here, it feels like you just don't fit in most places, right? Mm-hmm. If you come from a context like I do, where majority of the people you see are Black, and then you come to a place where if I see you, a Black person at the park, I am ecstatic.
Oh yeah, and
I'm trying to talk to you, and then there's the weird interaction of maybe this particular person does not agree with the way that I approach Blackness. So now there's that conflict that exists, and that's why I'm saying it's just different here in the way it happens. But when you understand that your Blackness is its kind of own independent, beautiful thing, that there could be a cultural context that is a community, but you still fit into that community. The beauty of it is the beauty of the shades. It's not the beauty of one particular shade, right? It's a multiplicity that makes it unique. That's why Blackness, right, is a cultural kind of malleable position. And I think if you start there, you fit in most places, unfortunately, comfortably or uncomfortably.
Okay, so going back to, because you said go to therapy, and obviously that's secretly what this panel is for me. I mean, I'm secretly, but which brings me back to me explaining why this panel is called Black and Biracial. So I thought a lot about Black, okay, I'm going to start doing that. I'm Black. And when someone says, half Black, I'm going to be like, no, I'm Black. I'm going to stand on that. I do this a lot. A little side story. And this is a very sad side story. Everyone's gonna be sad. When my mom, my biological mom, when she was dying, there was a day where she called me and she was like, "Your birth father has your book. He read it. He's really mad. He's really mad. You better get over it." So I went over to talk to her, and it turned out it was kind of a setup. He was actually on his way over to confront me about, his portrayal in the book. So before I could get out of there, he comes into the room and he starts shouting at me. And, again, my mom's on her deathbed. So I was like, "What are you doing? Get out of here. We got to go. Be fine. Yell at me somewhere else. We're trying to leave." And eventually he really starts yelling, and I'm like, I'm just going to run away. I'm just going to flee this scene. So I'm trying to leave. And then he's like, "You only cared about having a relationship with your mom because she's Black. You're obsessed with being Black. Well, guess what, bucko? You're half Black." And I said to him "Oh, you're blowing it." And then I left. But I thought about that as just so many times when people would say to me, "You're half Black," it was this kind of subtle attempt to undermine, my power or certainly whatever argument I was making. It was "Okay, well, good point, but you're disqualified." So, and I mean, that moment was the moment where it was just so clear that that's what that's about. So now I always want to push back on half Black. But, that's this really complicated things because, I guess, in terms of the language that I've grown up with, that's what I am. And then, my children are a quarter Black, but I don't actually want them to be I'm a quarter Black. I want my kids to be I'm Black. So anyway, I said all this to my therapist, and then, she was like, how do you identify? And I was like, Black, and then I asked, how do you identify? And my therapist, who is also Black, said, Black and biracial. And I said, Black and biracial. And so that's what this panel is called. It just confused me because I'm used to my halfness being weaponized against me. So I don't want that to be in the air. I don't even want it to be something that people can say.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
It's your panel.
It's our panel.
So when were you, like, whatever the other half is that we have not mentioned? Like, at what point were you ever that other half to anyone? When they say,
half white, like,
well, is that what? Okay, so it's white. Okay, so when were you ever half white?
Oh, never. And that's, I've said, I used to say all the time, as a rebuttal to this, because everything was jokey for me when I was a teen. I would say, if you look Black, you're Black. And, I do think there's some truth to that, because so much of Blackness is experience. Like what you know about being Black in the world just comes from what you've experienced and who you speak to. And, it's a learned thing. Like, it feels like Blackness is very experiential, rather than like concrete or rooted in biology necessarily, So my experience has always been as a Black person. And of course, I wrote this whole book and then realized that, and then threw this panel to celebrate. Where I really wanted to start this panel that we started a half hour ago is like, what am I supposed to do with that, y'all? Like, am I supposed to, should I ease up on half Blackness, or should I be more militant about Blackness? I mean, I set myself up. I know what the answer is there, but I want to know, like, when I'm told, like, am I Black and biracial? Are these two terms that I should use to identify myself? You said earlier, Blackness is constructed. And so, like, what, now we're capitalizing it? Like, I have questions, y'all. Like, help.
I think this is a conversation, and not only just, do you identify as Black or half Black? I think it's bigger than that. And so the way that you show up is always going to be different as you evolve as a human being. So as you grow and change and have different experiences, you're going to show up different. The Blackness isn't going to disappear or just kind of go away. And I think, there should be a pushback with that half Black rebuttal when someone says, no, actually, you are half Black. And your response is, no, that is not what shaped me. That's my answer. Maybe in your case, it might be a different answer, but it's still that pushback. When you show up in a space, like Ben said, nobody's going to say you're half white. That's not going to be a thing. That's not going to happen. You don't get to capitalize on the privileges then of saying, hey, I'm half white. I'm going to show up in this space and be white. Now I want to have all of these privileges at my disposal. You're not doing that. And I think being able to just show up as you are, we're all after that. And I know that for me, I grew up with a Black family, but my experience as a Black woman in my family is likely different from my brother's experience, in our family. So I think deeply, about that. And there is no one experience. And if we can showcase that, even having been here coming from the US and that experience being very different from being in Canada, we need to have conversations and talk about that. Because sometimes we don't even know. And we have this one monolithic idea of Blackness. And I think that's what a lot of people are putting us up against and saying, well, you don't match this idea of what I see Blackness to be. Therefore, you are fraudulent. Go sit over there. And so we have to push back, I think, on that conversation for sure.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah. Right. And like, I'm always looking for license to just feel more strongly about things, or at least to feel like I can stand on my points. I'm so used to being just kind of the only one making my arguments, in my space. And then, there's no support, there's no validation. And so you're like, well, I hope that was right. And you either you back off of it or yeah, you're just kind of left to imagine maybe you're right, and you know, the angels are high-fiving you, like, you know, there is invisible agreement. But yeah, like it's exciting to, like, whenever I get to speak to someone else who just says, yeah, like, why would you ever let somebody diminish your blackness? Like that, it blows me away every time, because I'm new to that response. So the other
I
thing,
think it's okay though to be new. It's okay to be new to that response, because I think it could be something that you come into, right? Like this idea of evolving into how you're going to respond to this. Because I wasn't always like that. I was like, oh, okay, kind of cowering. And now I'm like, no, listen, how dare you take my experience? You know, and I think writing through that is what allowed me to claim that a little bit more, having, you know, the space on the page to really work through that, because I think it's quite problematic also to sit inside of that narrative, or to have it in your head. Right? Sometimes that's the only voice, is the voice that you're telling yourself, no, you're half this, you're not good enough, not enough. And that's the narrative that, you know, you end up believing. So it can take some time, I think, to crawl out of that.
Yeah. Chelene, you are working on a book right now about Black self-love and joy, which seems incredibly relevant to this discussion. When I heard that you were writing this book, my first thought was like, yeah, it was funny. You actually said earlier, like, am I the best person to write this book? And in my mind, I was like, no, you're going to say no, right? But like, because that's what I think about me. Like, if somebody asked me, like, hey, do you want to write a book on Black self-love and joy? I'd be like, oh, I'm not the guy for that. Like, you should call Chelene.
Please don't call me. But that's what I said in the beginning, though. I said no. And I was like, no, you can't ask me to do that. And all of these things are spiraling in my head. And all of these experiences that I had, you know, people telling me you're not Black enough, you shouldn't do this. How dare you show up and edit this all Black chapbook? There's all these different experiences that started to kind of stitch themselves together. And even, you know, close friends telling me, well, you don't look that Black, as if it's supposed to be a compliment of some kind. It's weird to me. So all of that comes up, you know, and I'm thinking, should I write this book? And I went through this whole reflective process. And then I'm like, okay, I'm writing this book. This is going to be huge for me. And even if, you know, you got the haters and the naysayers in the corner, this book is going to change the way I show up. And so I took that 1 year to write this first draft. And I'm telling you, it's a different person on the other side of that manuscript. And I still have like 10 drafts to go. So who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, you're not done at all. Did you, so when I was writing Invisible Boy, again, I was so worried about being like delegitimized in some way that I did intense research. You know, it was like, I got to read a lot of bell hooks, because if someone's like, you didn't read any bell hooks, I'm gone, you know? And then it was like, I need to read like more than just Beloved for Toni Morrison, right? Like I need
you better believe it.
Time to read The Bluest Eye, you know, and Sula. Like if I don't, someone's going to throw me out. And so like I did all that. And then, you know, I remember at one point, and it was not long after this thing with my therapist, I was like, okay, I need to be able to say what Blackness is. And it was like my downfall. I had like 2 months where I was like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm sure that the bottom of this has been gotten to, and I'll find whoever got there. And so, you know, I mean, I feel like I got to like Fred Moten. I don't know if you're familiar with Fred Moten, Chelene.
No.
But Ben, you are.
I would assume one of his contemporaries would be, are you familiar with Saidiya Hartman?
Yes.
Okay,
yes, I have
so
her
one
book
of his
right
contemporaries, Saidiya Hartman is
he's harder to read than Saidiya Hartman, right? Which is, you know, like, but yeah, so we got to a point where he was like, what is Blackness? And I was like, oh, here we go. And then it was like, what is it to be an irreducible force, like reduced in, like, it went on for so long. It was like a paragraph long question. And it didn't answer the question. So, I just like, yeah, right. Like, I just want to know, I mean, like, did you do this kind of research for this book? Like, or did you just, I don't know, like, were you just in communion with friends? Like, what happens to write a book on Black self-love and joy and get to a point where you feel like you can present that book and put your name on it?
Yeah, exactly. For me, I knew that my experience was going to be important, but it was not going to be the only story in the book. And so, I thought long and hard about, the Black folks in my community and outside of my community that I wanted to spend time with. So I probably have maybe 30 hours of recorded conversation of me just talking to other Black community leaders. So, and this is not like the interview type conversation. This is me just kind of being in the space and seeing what happens. And there was even a fear attached to that. So I knew that I was going to speak with other Black leaders, but there was a fear of, well, what if we don't connect? Or what if, they think, why is Chelene writing this book? So that fear showed up in every single phase of the writing process, which is weird. But, there's quotes from other Black folks. There's conversation documented in the book. And there's also my experience and how my experience has changed after speaking with these folks. And I think that's the most interesting aspect of the book is I come in with my experience and then I hear the experiences of other folks. And, as a collaborative effort, this book is so much bigger than me. Mm-hmm. This is my experience, but it's so much bigger than just that. And that was hard. That was a lot of work, but it was also, again, something that totally changed my outlook, especially in terms of how I saw myself and how others saw me. It sounds like it's so big and cheesy, but for real, like that's what happened. It was like this evolution of self. And that's my biggest takeaway so far from writing that first draft.
Yeah, like I have to imagine it would have just because something like that for me would, I think, give me some of this license that I still feel like I'm looking for, to just I guess I'm not really I feel like I know who I am now, but I want to acknowledge that I haven't known who I am for that long. I feel like all the data suggests I don't know who I am. I'm like, oh no, I figured it out. Like I got it. But, I've got 35 years of not knowing who I am. So it just feels like, my experience is that I have no idea.
So I want to say two things. Yes. The first one is again, shout out to Moden, and I want to attempt to explain what his theory is and how I think you probably agree because based on conversations we've had, I think the way we've come to understand or at least discuss Blackness means that it's experiential. So if we start with that position, that it's experiential and that people that identify as Black or would, like you said, look Black, are experience the blackening process, which, they would say are things where people are viewed as being able to be treated less than, right? If that's a common occurrence that happens that people think they experience when you meet people like Chelene said, right? When you go and you talk to these people and all of these experiences begin to connect to each other, for him, that's the texture of Blackness, which means that it's not supposed to be the same. It's not supposed to look the same. You are not looking for validation of Blackness in any Black person. Does that make sense? What you're finding is commonality and experience that makes you believe you're right.
I love that.
And it's that commonality of experience that begins to create that connection of now saying Blackness is something that we experience, because it makes no sense that a group of people can go into the store or like we experienced when the four of us went out that night, 4 Black men walking down the street in Vancouver, and the amount of people that literally stopped to look at us.
You're like, are they marauding?
I was so confused. I was like, it's only 4 of us. It's really not that many, and still that commonality of us all being able to experience that. Or if you take one of us out and we tell the person that was not there about it, and they're like, of course that happened to you.
Yeah.
That, of course, is the commonality of the experience, right? So I don't you're not, I don't know. I just feel like I need to say you're Black. I clearly am not the Rosetta Stone of Black people, nor am I, the license giver of Black people. But it's just if that's who you believe that you are, if that's who you identify as, that's the identity, if that's the social location you exist in, that's what you are. That is that not where we are?
I think that's absolutely.
So I don't understand why it seems okay to people to press that issue for race, as if that is not also a position you're allowed to occupy, right?
Yeah.
Culture,
I mean, like, certainly it's because if we do what you are saying, I mean, which, like, that is what we do, but like, if we are doing that outwardly, then, we're building a coalition, right? And we're getting stronger, and we are getting more solid, yeah. I mean, one of the reasons that my book is called Invisible Boy is because, like, I never really quite felt real. And I didn't begin to feel real until, like, I met my biological mom, and actually started to just consciously engage with, like, no, I am a Black person, and I don't have to do all this stuff to prove it or figure out a way to hide it. And I know that I'm coming from a very particular trauma, but I certainly think it's interesting. I wanted to ask you both about like capitalizing Black. So because we talked about this, Chelene, when I was writing my book, because I was like, okay, so I was working at the Vancouver Sun, and it was during, like, what I have been calling Black Square Summer. We all remember this summer where all the Instagrams of our white friends and some of our friends of color, were Black squares for a while, and there was a lot happening. And it was a really weird time. We were all just kind of like looking at our screens, like, how do we fix the world from here? And right around that time, like, one of the big gains that we made as a Black community was, like, the CP style guide changed, and now you capitalize the B in Black. And so in my newsroom, there was, like, a quiet little backlash. Like, there were just people like, oh, like, why would we do this? Are we going to capitalize the W in white? And then, other people would.
When was it not capitalized? No, stop.
Well, yeah, right. And so, like, it was an issue then, and I felt really, I was like aggrieved. It was like, no, like, we are absolutely going to capitalize the B just because all of you jerks don't want to. And so then, and obviously that's, I had to investigate that particular. Yeah, I saw that. I saw you thinking about it. So I had to investigate. I had to investigate that. But then I also, like, I was halfway through writing my book where I wasn't capitalizing the B. And so then I also had to look, again at myself and figure out, like, okay, well, do I capitalize this B? And why? Like, what is my reasoning for doing it? Because I can't just do it because, like, some of the guys on the copy desk made me mad. That's not going to do it. But then I struggled to find license to capitalize it. I was like, okay, well, somebody needs to tell me that this is the right thing to do in a way that I believe. And again, it does always come back to you, right? Like, you need to be able to stand on your own beliefs. But I went to you, Chelene, and I asked you, like, hey, what do I do?
What did I say? What did I even say?
So you were editing this, I think, the chapbook then. And you told me that there had been this issue because, you were working with a lot of Black artists, and some of them wanted to. Can you talk about that a little bit? Can I just you go.
I'll go. I was editing a Black chapbook, so full of these amazing, beautiful Black poets. And some of the writers said, like, listen, I do not want to capitalize the B, and here's the reason. Some writers said, I definitely want to capitalize the B in Black, and here's the reason. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, just having the choice is how we break down this barrier of should we or should we not. And so we have this chapbook that is capital B, not capital B, and that is the mix. And again, that same idea of creating a variety of experiences, same thing with intention behind capitalizing or not. I think it's having the choice and standing firm in that choice, but also attaching an intention to it. So what it is you as an individual are doing, and you're not doing it to, like you said, get back at these copy editors, or whatever. And they're like, oh, let me stick it to you. So then it becomes more intentional when you also hold your work in print. You know, if once you have something published, it's not going anywhere. Whether people buy it or not, it is forever. You know, I think about that. So our choices and our intentions need to match, you know, how we see ourselves and what we want representing our work. So it seems like a small thing to really think about, but it's such a big discussion, I think.
Yeah, it was huge. I went through the whole thing, and I eventually decided, like, I'm capitalizing the B because when I hear people say just the word Black, I hear it big and loud. I hear capital B, and I realized that, like, I you know, I mean, certainly in my family, like, I would wince if I heard somebody say, you know, the word Black. And, you know, it's funny because I'll still do that around, you know, certain people I know in Abbotsford, and, like, you know, I'll wince, and then they'll be talking about just like Black the color, you know, and I'll be like, oh, I hope that they didn't see me, you know. They were like, oh yeah, and so then I went to write on the blackboard, and I'll be like, you know, just because I, like, what if they say something just so dumb, and then I have to forgive that? Like, I'm so ready to just kind of like swallow a little bit of you know, my own diminishment. That, you know, the word feels very big and threatening. And then what I did to justify that even more was that the first time that you see the word in the book, it's a white lady yelling it to me, and I make a point of saying that she said it with a capital B.
Right.
And so then every time after that, you know, I want you to hear how I hear it when somebody says the word. And it was like, okay, like, that is so specifically about me that maybe I can get away from,
I love that,
what I think is the you know, the morality, you know, of the style guide. But what was so interesting was that I did that, and then, you know, and then the copy editors came back to me, and they were like, okay, like, hey, we're just gonna check, like, you know, is that what you want to do? And I was like, cool. Like, that is, yeah. But then they were like, okay, great. So what about Afro? Like, you talk a lot about your Afro, capital A then? And I was like, no, what do I do?
More work.
So, yeah. So, like, I actually, I felt like I came to I was like, okay, well, yeah, like, I'm absolutely going to capitalize it. I'm going to capitalize all of these Black terms, you know, and really stand on that. But then it felt like othering Blackness in my own book about Blackness. And so then I thought, no, these words need to be normalized. Maybe I have to take the capitals away now. And then I thought, no, I'm going to keep the capital B for Black, but I'm going to do a lowercase a for Afro, because the only other hairstyles that I can think of that are capitalized are othered hairstyles. Yeah. I asked around for like 3 days. I was like, name a hairstyle that's capitalized. And people were like, Mohawk, Afro. Does the Fu Manchu count as a hairstyle? And that's what happened all 3 times I asked people. That exact same, it was like the Family Feud. Just like ding, ding, ding. There's all the answers when you ask somebody to name a racialized hairstyle.
I think the capital versus, I agree. I don't think it necessarily matters. I've not written a book, but I've read several. And one of the earliest, I'll finish yours too, I promise. One of the earliest ones I remember reading, I want to say it was by Michael Eric Dyson. And at the very beginning of the book, he wrestles with this question of capital B versus lowercase b. And the entire point was that to think that it has to be one or the other is the literal antithesis of Blackness. To think that it is limited to only being this thing is what it has been in the past. So to say that it has to be capitalized or lowercase, or it has to have a B at the front or anything else, that it cannot be more than the singular thing that we want it to be, is the issue. And I think that when I hear like Black or capital B, lowercase b, Black of any type you think of, that's kind of where I go. It's like, again, multiplicity.
Yeah.
It's never a singular thing. And when we do begin to try to singularize, I think something as complicated as Blackness, it just becomes distorted.
Yeah, no, I mean it's true, and again, that's where I'm coming from, right? Is I was really just told what blackness was by white people and TV made by white people about black people. So it's always been pretty messy for me. I want to ask as well then about BIPOC. Do you have thoughts on BIPOC as a term? Because I've just found that people. It's another one of these ones. And I think the other issue too is that whenever like a term kind of like rises up organically, you know, I mean, it comes out of like a grassroots movement for a reason, but then it gets mainstreamed. And often that's about when I hear of it. And when it's being mainstreamed to kill it. You know, it's it's being introduced into the discourse as like, isn't this a ridiculous thing? And then just kind of slowly it loses a lot of its power in the mainstream. And so, you know, I was recently on This Is Van Color, the TV show, you know, and the host Mo Amir asked me like, what is woke? Like, what does woke mean? You know, like, all right, I'll talk about that. But I thought to myself, like, this is the same thing. Like, this is a word that had a point at a time, and then, you know, mainstreamed and has been just obliterated. You know, now when you hear the word woke, it's usually coming out of the mouth of people that hate us. And I think that that's really weird. And so, you know, I feel like it changes our experience of the terms that we use to identify ourselves. And obviously that's the point. The function of racism is distraction, Toni Morrison, etc. You know, I think about that quote 100 times every single day. Today, when Elon Musk was like, I'm going to unban all of the Twitter accounts that were banned for racism, I was just like, oh, that's Toni Morrison said, you know, primary function of racism. Yeah, you can have Twitter back for your community organizing or whatever, but we've let every racist out. So have fun. But yeah, I think about this as it pertains. You should get a Twitter. I think about this as it pertains to the term BIPOC, because I feel like the same thing happened there. And I want to know like what your relationship is to the term at all anymore.
That's a good question. I feel like I have no emotion connected to this term at all. And I think this is going to sound silly, but I think it's like cilantro. You love it or you hate it. You use it or you don't. That's what it feels like. And for me, it's like I identify as Black. And if somebody puts me in this BIPOC category, I don't feel a particular way. And I don't have a reason for that. So I don't really feel anything. And whether or not that's because it's been, you know, taken from this grassroots existence into this mainstream, I don't know. Maybe Ben has some insights. I feel like Ben has some.
I have opinions about everything.
I want to hear your opinions.
I often do not share them with the public, though. But okay, so I think that the term BIPOC is, I think for me, it's all about organizing, right? Like the way the people you choose to organize with. So if you're showing up at a BIPOC meeting, my assumption would be that those group of people all have similar interests and goals. That may not be the case, because I also think that terms are often kind of commodified and used against people who want to organize too, which is why sometimes disorder is indeed the best order to have. But I participated in BIPOC events. I personally identify as Black, but I don't see a reason why we wouldn't unify, when I think at the end of the day, if it's true that Blackness is indeed, you know, more malleable, that we have experiences that connect us commonly. I think that probably happens throughout the world, because from a scientific perspective, didn't they say everybody started from Africa anyway? I'm just saying,
yeah.
Some of us, some of our cousins just look different.
Yeah, you know, that was kind of it for me. You know, again, oftentimes when I hear these terms, it's because like a white person I know is like, can you believe this ridiculous new term? You know, I'll be like, oh, come on. Like, I don't know what you're talking about, but I know that you heard it on Fox News or whatever. And like, it's going to take so much time for me to Google it and then get the right answer. And like, what, just for you? Like now, and then I'm going to come back over and be like, so it turns out everything you said was just utter hogwash. And I hate to say that, Mom, but it just full on. Anyhow, so like for, BIPOC, I thought, okay, well, like maybe I need to be using this term. Again, everything's anxiety with me, right? I'm like, oh, I'm doing it wrong. So, I looked into it, and the thing I realized, is it's for community organizing. And of course, a term that's like, hey, what about like if there is full on Black and Indigenous solidarity? Like, let's go. Of course, that term is, it's just going to be, like just firebombed into oblivion, right? Like, no, you can't have that. So, it's another one that I want to hold on to. And I really want to keep using it. But then again, the discourse now is so weird, right? So I know that like not long ago, there was an op-ed that ran, I'm going to say, across the Post Media Network, where all the dumbest op-eds run. And it said, like, the word BIPOC fails because it doesn't include French Canadians. Yes, there hasn't been a lot of laughter tonight, so I really appreciated that. Yeah, and it was just like, okay, like we're done with this one. If we're gonna argue about whether or not French Canadians are part of the BIPOC alliance, like you can join the alliance, be an ally. Like, don't be like, retire the term until it mentions the French.
I'm not from Canada. Were French people racialized in Canada?
In a way.
Okay.
In a way, Chelene, can you answer that? Because I might just say things
wish. I mean, I don't know. But that's the thing. You never know that these things are actually an issue until one person says this thing, and now all of a sudden it's a huge deal. I don't know. Because once you open that door, and then you're just allowing everyone to come and say, well, I want to be part of that term too, and I want to be in there, and I want to be in there. And now it's this homogenous thing that doesn't make any sense. So I think even just attaching a purpose, to this term, what is it being used for? Why do we need it? But we never ask questions anymore. We just have this thing, here it is. Oh, let's just either tear it down or embrace it. We're not going to have a conversation. So I don't know. The French Canadian thing, to me, that's news. I haven't heard that they want it to be.
That's a big Canadian book, White N-Words of the World.
I have so many questions. Can I just ask one?
Yes.
So were they still the governing body in Quebec while recognizing themselves as being subservient? Does that make sense? We in charge and we're subservient, to me, is wild. But okay, I'm gonna explore it.
I mean, like that's another thing that happens, though, right? Like if we're talking about co-opting language and the way it gets mainstreamed and destroyed, I mean that happens with narrative all the time, right? I mean, that's what, like, a lot of Christianity's theology is just the co-opting of a slave narrative, right? They're like, oh, we're the new Israelites. And you're like, whoa, okay, guys, like you're losing a lot of context in this one sentence.
Kanye, went back up.
Yeah, right. Like it's and so that same thing. Oh yeah, I actually feel like it. We are absolutely taking questions. And it's time. Like, is there a?
And I will say too, I can't hear the question online, so you might have to pass the mic or repeat it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't leave me in the dark.
Yeah, I actually really haven't like turned to the audience even one time. Because I'm just thrilled talking to you guys.
Hold on, Chelene doesn't even know there's an audience.
Oh yeah, let's.
Audience, I want to see you.
There you go. Audience. Let's say hi to Chelene, everybody.
Oh, you're so beautiful, audience. Oh, look at this.
Yeah.
Oh, I wish I was there.
That's me.
Nice to see you all.
Okay, we're back.
All right. The question. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know how far we want to go with this about the French and the Anglos, but Ben, you mentioned they're in charge and they're feeling subservient. I get why that would be, because there's a federal government as well, right? And so there is a suppression, and in the workplaces, in many places, there will have been and still is. So I try to get that, but it becomes strange, this is my view, in Quebec currently with the Bill 21, where you're outlawing various people to express in their clothing or their wear their faith commitment, much of which may be attached to their cultural origins also. That's a racism.
Yeah. Did you get that, Chelene?
Yeah, I can hear it.
Yeah, I obviously don't want to just pivot to being like, Quebec is strange as a concept. It's not the right. That's my fifth panel. When you guys, what is Quebec? And then a colon, and then a second title. Because there absolutely is there is oppression that has happened there. I'm always a little bit conflicted about Canada spends a lot of time focused on that particular conflict. And I always think both of y'all are here illegally, land back, that solves that one. But I don't I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. I already did, so it's too late. But it's complex, and that's something that I'm not prepared to argue about during this panel. I don't know where to go with it really. I think that again, that narrative, or even just the language of oppression, that has been co-opted in that particular conflict. And when we talk about multiculturalism in Canada, we're often talking about making space for the varying degrees of whiteness, and not talking about making space for people of color. And we are especially not talking about making space for the BIPOC community. So I think that the discourse around identity and ethnicity in Canada is always so complicated, because once you start talking about it, someone's like, well, what about the French? And it's like, what about the French? I don't know. But again, the point too is that we do need solidarity, and oppression anywhere is oppression everywhere. So it's well, I'm against that too, and I'm here, but I also feel like maybe some parts of the movement and identity and language that I'm working with have been taken for granted.
For context, I spent a lot of time working with students to teach them scenario planning and the history behind movements, so that we could create these awkward social interactions that other people have to answer as debate arguments. And we won a lot of rounds because people surprisingly don't know how to deal with racism or sexism or other isms that can exist that they participate in daily, right? So to this point of coalitional alignment, it just feels to me that all coalitions will always be kind of interrupted, or sabotaged, because if you're not going against what the people who have the actual power want, you're not coalitional. You don't have to coalesce with other people because you're moving with the tide, right? There's nothing to push against. So I think movements can get hijacked when we do not have very clear and solid goals that we're looking at. A lot of people like to say, well, the civil rights movement happened in the United States and they got all this stuff passed. And I was like, yeah, but that was a very long time. And it was a lot of pain and a very hard struggle, but they had a clear goal, right? They wanted to kind of make sure to put in law that equality existed, that color existed, right? And I think the problem we have now is we want to be coalitional. We can identify particularly that there may be issues that exist in the world, but we're unable to identify what the thing is we're really pushing against.
Yeah.
And some of that deals with the acceleration that, we were talking about earlier when we talk about time and how the world is just coming at us so fast. But the other part, again, is just swimming against the tide means people inevitably will try to co-opt things. They always steal it. They steal it all, right? From whether it's people's cultures, their clothes, their styles, everything. So it might be capitalism. I don't know. It might be a room full of really evil people. I'm not really sure. But there's definitely something. I think stay true to like you and I, just stay true to each other and coalesce that way. You know what I'm saying?
Any other questions? So this is question period now. And in this particular question period, we will not be disparaging Stephanie Allen, the great Stephanie Allen, who was disparaged in a recent question period at Parliament. Never mind. Okay. Questions.
So my name is Kira, and I am also a biracial person who identifies also as Black.
Black and biracial?
That's right. And I think as we were talking about the specifics of our Blackness, so I think it's important to say that my mother is white and my father is Black. And why I think that's important is because for me, the narrative of you're half Black has exclusively come from the Black community. So I think it's so when you told that story about your dad, your biological dad, what I heard when he said you're half Black was not a rejection. It was, you are not acknowledging that you come of me.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I heard in that narrative. And I'm upset that I've now defended someone who was yelling at you and was kind of abusive.
Yeah.
But I just say that because even this summer I had a misunderstanding with someone within the community who was upset about the West End mural that got defaced with the N slur in the West End. And I wrote something that I thought was a supportive comment. And this person took it. It was really escalating and I didn't know why. And I kept apologizing. And he said, well, you're, as someone who is half Black, I would think that you would be in solidarity with me. But it wasn't like, I'm half Black, blah, blah, blah. He went there, just really pushed me down to say that I shouldn't have gone in that space and I can't claim that Blackness. So I just,
it's complicated.
It's very complicated. And I think for me too, there's a lot of comments about my hair, my appearance. I'm not living, and then, of course, being in Vancouver and I'm a queer person and we're talking about Christianity and the church and all of these things, is it more important that I'm acknowledged within a Black community and I'm seen as Black? Or is it more important that I'm acknowledged within a queer space and understood as queer? And we have all these overlapping things. So, and then my final comment is that I also work as a nurse, which is modeled in the white feminine ideal. And so all of these things that make you a good and moral nurse are stemmed in anti-Blackness. End of my thoughts.
Yeah, those are great thoughts. And I mean, it's like so much of what we do is rooted in anti-Blackness that sometimes like it really does just wash over you, And I mean, I keep just talking about, having kind of come out of this fog not that long ago. And so like, I'm trying to talk a lot now about that because, I won't be in this weird transitional space for that long. It's like, I need to, I still remember the old ways. We got to write them all down. But yeah, like you wind up internalizing so much of that anti-Blackness without realizing it. And then at some point you begin to realize it. And it's gross because you're like, oh, like it's all in there. How do I get it all out? And then what is how can I convince myself that it's out? Because again, that's really the issue. And so, like, it makes me so mad when somebody tries to use like my mixture to discredit or undermine me. Cause it's just like, how dare you? Like that's such a complication for me every day in the world. And you're gonna throw it in my face. Like you're gonna weaponize it against me in this moment. Like, yeah, it feels, like just endlessly cruel. But yeah, I mean, that issue, with, my white dad, I think about that sometimes because I know that he, I know that it hurt him that I didn't like pursue a relationship with him the same way that I did with my biological mom. But like I went to him first and I went to him because I was more comfortable with whiteness than I was with Blackness. And I can acknowledge that now. And at the time it was just like, oh, he lives closer, or like some garbage like that. But I went there because that was where I knew I'd be the most comfortable. And then he made me deeply uncomfortable. And I asked him to call me by my correct name, and he would call me by the name he gave me when he gave me up for adoption. And, I asked him, like in a bunch of different ways to just like, hey, can you just try to respect who I am as a person now? And like the whole life that I lived when we didn't know each other. And like, he just wouldn't. And what I found when I met my biological mom was that she would, she saw all of me, and she didn't just see like her connection to me. She never shouted, "I made you," even though she did, but this other guy did. So I realized that, I'm trying so hard not to use his name that it's slowing me down. That my biological father, he still just wanted, he wanted me for himself, and there wasn't a love there so much as an ownership. And so, I understand that when he shouted that thing to me on the stairs, like that it came from a part of him that felt, jilted. But he still, like, surprise, managed to turn that into like a fucked up racist moment. And that's just so often what happens in these loaded moments. Your race gets weaponized against you. And I'm just kind of rambling because as you talked, I was thinking about all of this is going to change, and then I'm going to have to explain this to my kids. They're lighter skinned than I am. And I mean, they literally are going to have less skin in the game. And I need to be like, guys, you cannot let people convince you that you're not all black. You're black. We're black. And I don't know, this whole thing, right? The whole point of this panel is that I don't have answers, right? I really have no idea. But I've been given this incredible position of power to just like sit and ask two people I respect so much, like, what do you do about this? And it's so complex. And always I hear a story from just like, well, the other side, and like, oh, that really changes. If you change the gender of your black parent, that changes things. Like, it's fascinating. I don't know. I just kind of
so complex. Things. It's so raveled. It's so complex. But I think, again, the more we have these conversations and share ideas, I think even if somebody is curious and they are just genuinely curious and they ask a question in a way that helps them not make assumptions, I think that can be helpful too. Like if I say I'm half black, I'm not going to say that, but if I said that, folks might make the assumption that the other half is white. And in my case, my dad is South Asian, but let's make that even more complicated. My mom is black, my dad is South Asian, but my dad was born and raised in Uganda. So if I say my dad is from Uganda, immediately people think he's black. And I'm like, he's not, he's South Asian, and him and his family were, pushed out in the 70s when Idi Amin was, reigning this place. And so that's a complicated story in itself that I don't even have all the answers to. So I think if folks are curious about who we are and where we come from, and we can have that conversation and it feels good and it releases the assumptions that are often made, I think that's okay. I think that's where conversations are healthy. But it's so complex, especially with these different intersections, right? So, I mean, I have a son who is, I guess you would say, quarter black and trans and all of these other things. And it's like, we have some complex conversations ahead of us, right? But I think it's also the work of the parent to say, okay, how are we going to go about this? And then to be consistent with that conversation and how you're going to parent and be on board with whoever you're sharing that parenting role with, whether they are white or black or whoever. Being on the same page is important too. But I think some of us don't have that. Like, I didn't have those conversations with my mom or my dad about how to show up and how to present, So I think it's so complex, and our experiences are so unique. But I love sharing space like this because you feel less alone, when you hear other stories, for sure.
Yeah, that really is it. You guys, it's just been nice to spend time with you here. Do we have any, I mean, it has, I just love you guys so much. Do we have any other questions here?
Yeah, that was not a good choice of words. Yeah. So I think his question is, if racial terms are not okay, why is it okay to pay music in public that uses those terms? I don't think it's anything wrong with saying the N-word if you're Black. Wait, but hold on for a second. But I let you finish, and then I was just going to respond. But then, yeah, you started talking. So I don't think it's anything wrong with me saying it. Matter of fact, I just had a conversation with Harrison, a very private, conversation we had where I was like, hey,
yeah,
what's your comfort level?
Can we use the N-word
as friends? I say it a lot, actually. I think that, and I start from a position where NOMO, and if you don't know what the term NOMO is, I suggest you look it up. NOMMO. No,
wait, what is it?
The power of creation, right? Words and creation. And one of the original skills that enslaved people determined, or that enslaved people, it's like chattel slavery in America, what they had to do was figure out a way to navigate creating a language in this foreign land they were in, where they were being forced to work, to live, to try to survive. And creating and recreating and capturing words is power. That's why writing stuff is so powerful, because you can't take Harrison's story. It exists. So if he decided to place that word in there strategically, for all intents and purposes, there's nothing wrong with him doing that. Because from an artistic expression, even from an academic perspective, that word therein has power to his particular art. Does that make sense? So like a song, and whether or not people play that song out loud, I could ask the same question. Why would you play a song out loud that says, I'm proud to be country? Like we don't know what that means. Or why would you play a song that says anything else that relates to, but for some reason, Black artistry is the one that's disrupting public spaces. I don't find that to be true, relevant, or important enough to actually say people can't play their music they choose to play. That's it. Look, that's his choice, and like my mama say, we all make choices.
You are absolutely.
You just got to be able to back that choice up. If I'm near you,
you're allowed to say the N-word in public. You go right ahead.
Go ahead, say it now if you want to. Say it now if you want to. Okay, so what's the problem? It exists, right?
Okay, let's definitely, yes, thank you. Yeah, let's get a microphone.
Thanks. I just want to get back on the topic of the. So I'm the mother of two biracial children. I just found it very interesting that even with both a white and a Black parent, and having raised them with sharing experiences in both my Caribbean family and his family, which came from Nova Scotia, before Confederation. So as Canadian as whatever Canadian is, yeah. That they still, they identify as Black. So I feel that this conversation that talks about Blackness being an experience and that heritage, I think that really resonated with me because I could never really quite put it together. It's not that, you've observed where you have a Black family and there's more culture, activity, there's the food, there's a richness of culture and you really identify as this Black family, and maybe it's not as prominent in the white family. So I think that was a really important point that you made of Blackness being an experience. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I would add is that within the Black community, the Black individuals were spread all over, Indigenous people's lands were stolen, but for Black people, their bodies were stolen and they're all over the world. So as a Black individual, there is this sub-level of, are you Black from the Caribbean? Are you Black from Africa? Are you Black from Europe? And I think that sort of plays into the Blackness a little bit. So I think those are some important points to talk about. Well, not talk about, but I just felt it was important to raise it. Yeah.
One thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately is James Douglas, who is the so-called father of British Columbia. and he was black. And his like when you read biographies of James Douglas, the authors don't really know what to do with that, and they don't know, like it's like they're white historians who are really hung up on like how black, so and they'll all say it weird, it'll be like how much black blood ran in his veins is unclear. Yeah, it's weird in every case, and like black blood comes up a lot. And so like there's this question of like, well, like, is he black? Like maybe he's just, like a little bit tan, like maybe. And then it certainly seems like he also made sure that his own photos were touched up so that the visual representation that we get of him is less black than he was. So like what I found really interesting is, he wound up here in British Columbia because it was as far as he could be from the British Crown. He could write letters where he sounded like a white person and then run this colony and kind of do whatever he wanted. He got to exist invisibly in some ways. But when he comes to Victoria and he sets it up, he's very mindful that like he's kind of the king of Victoria now, but the white people are coming. And when they come, he won't be the king of Victoria anymore. So he's actually looking for he's looking for black immigrants, but he does not want to create a Negro colony. He's very explicit about that. I don't want a Negro colony because they'll colonize us. So he's looking for like a very specific kind of black person. And obviously that it doesn't work like that. So there's this remarkable story here in Canadian history that's I mean, I'm not going to say never been told because I obviously read it somewhere, but like it's not widely known, which is that in 1858, California was trying to kind of figure out whether or not they wanted black people in the state at all, and they eventually decided that they didn't. And so, like I think it was like 800 black folks were thrown out of this kind of like nascent state of California, and they were like, "Where do we go?" And then they found out about Vancouver Island, and they were like, "And you will not believe who is in charge of this place." So they head out, and again, James Douglas is like perfect, like they. They're American, but they're not, like they're happy to be here, but they're not going to start their own thing. Like I don't have to be in solidarity with them. I can just use them to populate the island with black people, but not the wrong kind of black people. And what happens about 2 months after these it's like 400 to 800 black people arrive on Vancouver Island is the gold rush. So in April of 1858, there are about 800 people living, or, I'm going to say 800 settlers living on Vancouver Island. Let me be clear about that. And then in July of 1858, there are 10,000 people living on Vancouver Island. And there's a strong push for democracy so that they get the representative power to push out all of these black folks that have actually settled on Vancouver Island. And that's what happened. And there is no record of most of these black folks who came to Vancouver Island. And I think about that as like the founding of this province. Like that's what British Columbia, like that's how it began, right? With the erasure of us and the First Nations that were living there as one thing, one fell swoop, gone. Mm. And obviously with that, we lose language, we lose tradition, we lose history, we lose so much. And so now we're at this point where, we all get together in a room and we all are like, I stand on my own blackness and I stand on my experience. But also, like, if you were to ask me, what is blackness? I don't know, because like that, a sense of us as concrete and kind of knit together, that was intentionally obliterated. Like that's what British Columbia is. Wow. So here, and here we are. that was a response to your comment. But then I started talking about my own thing. But yeah, I think it's relevant. I think that when we talk about, the specific flavor of racism here in British Columbia, it is this ignorance about our absence. It's like, I don't know where they all went. And then this welcoming, like, oh, hey, because we have been wondering where you guys all went. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You'll find that there is room for you in this group of white friends or this group of white friends. Try not to walk down the street 4 black men at a time. Yeah. Let me quickly tell that. Ben and I are at this point in our lives where when we see like other black folks at the park with their kids, it's just like, hi, we gotta be friends. Let's exchange numbers right now. And so we were really doing that in the summer, and a whole group got together. This really interesting group. I
was going to say, to her point, we have a guy from the Caribbean, right? I'm from the States. Some Ghanaians.
Yeah. And then
the new guy he's from England, right? Or no? Isn't he from England?
Who's from England?
The older guy. I can't remember.
Carlos?
No. Carlos from.
Doesn't matter. Anyhow, it's a weird group, fun group, and so one night all the dads went out, right? So like I think I was tweeting about it, just like Black Dads Night Out, like here we go, like 4 black dads strong, coming down the sidewalk. So we're walking down Commercial Drive, and we were just kind of being rowdy out on the sidewalk, just talking like, ha ha ha, it's so nice to get away from our kids.
We're all dads. We weren't rowdy.
Yeah, rowdy is like we were chuckling aloud. Public plaza. But then like the server from the bar, like really on the other side of the sidewalk, came out like, can I help you guys? Like, do you want to come in? And I said, like, that is the farthest I have ever been from the door of an establishment and offered a service. Like, just came out like, hi, can I help you?
We were clearly waiting outside to rob that whiskey bar.
To rob Fett's whiskey kitchen.
Yeah, clearly.
They dropped. Wow. Well, it was just somebody reacting.
It was
not
an
like
experience.
Also, it's closing in December, so it's not a big deal. Is that sad? I don't know. That's sad for me. It's the gentrification of the drive is a whole thing. Anyhow, any other questions before we wrap up tonight? Okay, well then, I just want to say the hugest thank you to Ben Hagwood, who came all the way from America on American Thanksgiving.
I know.
Yeah, that's true.
My parents, I tried to get them to watch this because they were very upset that I was working today. But I don't, maybe a recording is possible. I don't know. Yeah.
Thank Ben,
and Thanksgiving or happy Black people ain't working today and you get to eat with your family day is what I really call it.
And a huge thank you to Chelene, who graced us from home here. And I think now you have date night. So
it. Time to
thank you so much.